in 1940, at the height of Nazi Germany's power. There were approximately 65 million people in Germany, and approximately 65 million of those were Nazis. I say this now to introduce the first book in my COVID-19 self-quarantine / summer reading list that are books that are necessary for every human being to read, I think. And the first one is this: The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William L. Shirer. Shirer was an eyewitness. He was in Germany during the 1930s and up until the war, and he saw firsthand what happened in this nation, like I said, of 65 million people. It was a wonderful, cultured nation. It thrived with the arts and sciences. It was the envy of the world. And what the fuck happened? Well, this could happen at any time, in any place. And when you read this book, see how fat it is? You'll understand. People can't put themselves in the place of other eras. We think the upward thrust of humanity makes everything better. Progress will out. Well, yes and no. If we were alive back then, in the 1930s in Germany, as a German, we would be a Nazi. That's just the way it is. And it's hard to face that fact. But you can see the parallels. And when you read that book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, the parallels are amazing. Another book that has been incredibly meaningful for me in my life is Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago. And this is even fatter than the other one. Look at that. Well, I guess they're about the same fatness. So if you want a thin book, these are not it. I'll share one observation from the Gulag Archipelago. Solzhenitsyn was an intellectual. He spoke out against Stalin, the Stalinist regime, and like many intellectuals who didn't toe the line, who didn't suck up, who didn't parrot the appropriate responses, who didn't think the appropriate thoughts, he was carted off to the Gulag, which was better than being just, which happened to a lot of them too. They were disappeared. Solzhenitsyn was marched off to the Gulag, and it was this really wonderful summer resort in Siberia that the average temperature was, 20 below zero, and it was really shitty. And what he observed the first day after leaving his life of freedom behind for who knows how long, because some people spent 20 years in the Gulag. A lot of people died there. They never left it. So he had no idea if he would ever see his real life again, a life of freedom again. And as he was walking into this confinement, this prison, he looked at a guard, and for a moment their eyes met. And he writes this down, and I always thought this was extraordinary. As he looked at this guard and they exchanged this glance, he said, it wasn't much of a stretch to imagine him in the position of the guard and the guard in his position being marched into this prison. And I thought that was amazing, because you would think someone whose life was just ripped from them and they were wrongfully imprisoned for thinking for themselves, that he would harbor this great bitterness, this animosity towards his captors. But yet he had this compassion and empathy that but for the grace of God, it could have been him as the guard. And the same thing goes for in Nazi Germany in the 1930s through the early part of the 40s during the war. You could have been a Nazi. Heinrich Himmler was a chicken farmer. He was content to raise his chickens on his little farm in off the beaten path, and circumstances arose, and the next thing you know, he's head of the SS and running and was in charge of making Auschwitz be what it was. So you never know. I mean, if the war didn't happen, he would have lived an uneventful, unremarkable life as a chicken farmer, and his neighbors would have probably spoke highly of him. Oh, Heinrich, he has the best chickens and the eggs. Let me tell you. But things change, and that's why hubris and epistemic hubris is one of the worst things, in my opinion. We need to have more humility and to put ourselves in the place of others, and even in the place of other time frames and other time periods, where we will not be in the 1930s Germany with the perceptions we have now in 2020 America. And that's hard for a lot of people to get, that they too can be a Nazi. They too can be a guard at the Gulag, ushering people to their deaths for the crime of thinking for themselves.